Hello, everybody. Let's go ahead and get out our oak aroma kits and go through oak aromatics and taste a little bit of Chardonnay. So this is going to be kind of a fun interactive lecture. So first thing is go ahead and get out your 6 aroma standards, open the top and smell them as we go through the lecture. And then also get out 3 glasses and go ahead and pour your 3 Chardonnay samples, 1, 2, and 3. I'm ready to compare and contrast these different wines and see if you notice anything. And I'd love to get your feedback on these if you think it worked or didn't work or anything else like that. The other thing I do want to point out is one of the Chardonnay samples was pulled a little while ago, so might be a little funky, but that's kind of the hope. So we'll see how it goes. So standard one, go ahead and get that tube and give it a nice little sniff. Then after you do that, go ahead and move on to the next slide. So what is it? It's just raw oak. And it's from undegraded lignin. It's just the lignin of the tree. And we're going to talk a lot about lignin as we move on. But the reality is that when you smell that tube, if you don't smell anything, that's okay. When you just have raw wood, it's a little sawdusty and there's not a whole lot there. So this just kind of goes through to show you that importance of the aging and toasting process and how much that can impact the wine and the oak itself. And to realize too that I took some oak and then just chopped it with my chop saw. So this actually probably has some heat added to it. So it probably even smells better than oak wood at all. So just note that it's not much there. But it's how we're going to go ahead and develop the smell and flavors that we're going to get in the wines down the road. So this is our base, and this is our blank canvas that the coopers are going to work with to deliver flavor and aroma to us. Okay, go ahead and smell standard number 2, and if you do that, give it a nice sniff and go ahead and go to the next slide. And what you're smelling here is furfural and 5-methyl furfural. In your particular case, you have some delicious homemade caramel that I learned how to make. I almost, first time around didn't go so well. This one went much better. But I want you to notice a couple of things on these ones all, is that when we call furfural and 5-methyl furfural, if you go ahead and look at the end of all of these are all furan 2-carboxaldehyde, furfuraldehyde, and then furfural is for furfuraldehyde and methylfurfuraldehyde. So, I mean, again, we're talking about these aromas that are very similar to the compound acetaldehyde that's produced by yeast. And so in this particular case, these ones smell like carbol and marzipan. It happens during the toasting process, and it's the caramelization of those broken down oak sugars, where we took cellulose and broke it down into a smaller sugar, and then eventually toasted that sugar into a compound that smells like caramel. So pretty cool. All right, go ahead and give standard 3 a nice little smell. And something tells me you're not going to have a problem figuring out what this one is. And the 2 compounds we're looking at here are guaiacol and methylguiacol. And the way I produced this one is pretty simple. I burned some oak dust. And so these 2 in particular are a little different because these are phenols, and phenols are much more stable. They last a lot longer, and they're going to stick around in the wine. They don't really integrate. So you'll see these in more heavy toasted barrels. You might get some things in here that start to remind you a touch of certain types of bourbon with heavy toast barrels and things like that. But again, derived from that pyrolysis or burning of lignin. And these smell smoky. And it comes from the toasting process. I know, imagine that. But we start to get that roasted toasty note. So start thinking about the type of wine that you would want to have that maybe smokiness in. And so, you know, things that might be more Syrah and gamey, you know, you're going to want a heavier toast, but probably not an aromatic compound you're going to be looking for in your, you know, Chardonnay or Grenache Blanc anytime soon. All right, standard number 4, give that one a nice little sniff. And this one is cis and trans oak lactone. And these ones are really interesting. But supposedly these are higher in American oak. That's what literature says, but I don't think we've always found that exactly the case as it is. But this in particular smells like coconut and whiskey. And there's a reason it smells like coconut and whiskey because that's what's in your standard. And so what we do is we go ahead and find this a whole lot in American whiskey, which I have not had currently, but I am going to think about having some shortly after this lecture. And so this is what these compounds are good for. And so some wines you might want to get more of that coconutty tropical note. And right now it's totally not cool to have those compounds, and all the cool kids aren't into it. But I know a number of people that are a little bit more old school that just absolutely adore these lactones. My dad is a junkie for lactone. He gets like super high lactone barrels so he can have this wine that smells like coconut. All right, go ahead and smell standard number 5 and take a quick second and then flip on to the next one. And this is vanillin or vanillin. And again, let's take a look at this here. Methylvanillin vanillic aldehyde. So again, this comes from the degradation of wood and lignin and during heating. So if we break this down, it's, a baby sugar. So it smells like vanilla. It's the same compound that's in vanilla. And it's from the wood, that broken down wood, and that toasting process. And coopers can modify their toasting process to bring high vanilla to the table. And if you go look at Sabrina's lecture, you can see how they did that, some of the different toast levels that they can do to bring that out. And some coopers are really, really good at dialing these numbers in. So you can get this at very specific levels in the barrel, which then will eventually end up in your wine. So go ahead and do standard number 6 and give that one a nice little smell. You notice there's very little in that container. And this particular compound is known as Eugenol and Isoeugenol. And again, these are phenols. And so in particular, these are much more stable and they don't go away as rapidly typically, but they smell like cloves and they are derived from the oak and toasting process. And one of the things that was for me a dead giveaway, and I always knew French oak, was this clove note. But there's a particular barrel that we'll get to when we get to Cabernet that just shocks me as to how much clove it brings to the table. So if this is an aroma that you're looking for, kind of put that in the back of your mind. And when we start tasting the Cabernets, I think we'll go ahead and get into that. Okay, it's taste time. If you haven't poured your Chardonnays, go ahead and pour them all. This is actually the Chardonnay that this came from. This is the Heritage Vineyard Chardonnay from the 2019 vintage. So let's go ahead and do a little tasty taste. So I want to talk about how these were made. These were produced pretty similarly. We whole bunch pressed them oxidative, and one of them in particular was a little bit loaded up with powdery mildew. So the first glass we're going to have is in a neutral barrel, and it was our powdery control juice. And so we whole bunch pressed it oxidative, and then we floated it. And after flotation, we were able to remediate all the powdery mildew issues. And I think that wine's showing actually quite nicely. And so we racked it and inoculated with a CY3079 yeast, which is a high nutrient demand yeast. And I've really struggled with it because it can get really reductive on you, especially in a low nutrient wine. Our fermentation was pretty long. It was about 3 weeks, almost 4. And then our MLF was to taste on all of these. And we called it with about 80% done with Enofirm Alpha. I want to point out that this wine was very low in yeast assimilable nitrogen, and we needed a lot of nutrient to get this through fermentation. It really. So the first two wines you have in front of you, wine 1 and wine 2. Wine 1 is Sanso from the Allier Forest, but it's older. It's a 2016 vintage, so this is its 4th use. Whereas the other one next to it, the 2019 Chardonnay, is again from Sanso, same forest, same toast, both untoasted head, but it's brand new. Let's go ahead and go through it. So I want to talk about some of the the kind of final chemistry and what's in front of you. So these are the two wines. Here's the ferment control chart. Started really quick, really rapidly, and I think that's where we ran into some of the reduction issues we ran into it. But I think we've got them cleaned up, getting them cleaned up pretty good at this point in time. So here's your actual pHs, pH 355 and 348, which is pretty much textbook spot on for an ML Chardonnay. That's your dream number. 355 is the goal. Non-MLs, you're looking at 335 or less. Our titratable acidity, 5.8 and 5.9, which is really amazingly low titratable acidity, considering how low those pHs are. I mean, this wine is obviously not very buffered. You can tell we were really gentle in the pressing process, not getting much potassium in here. Our ethanols are both around 14%, so this is a pretty full-blown beast. Even though we didn't pick it particularly high, but intentionally high bricks, it started a little higher than we thought. And our free sulfur dioxides are both pretty similar, right around 30 free, and our total sulfur dioxides are right around 70. So we still got some buffer room to add a little bit more. And I really have a goal with Chardonnay to try and stay under 100 milligrams a liter total. No particular reason other than just a clean winemaking goal. So let's go ahead and compare these two. And let's go ahead and look at 5-methyl furfural and furfural, which is that caramel note. And so the neutral, you'll notice, has very little of either of these two. There's very little 5-methyl furfural, and there's not a whole lot in terms of the still there, but there's still some being added to the equation. When you go to that new one, there is a ton of this compound. As a matter of fact, Sanso Coopers, we see the highest numbers of furfural that we see of any of the other Coopers. But I want to make a caveat to that. The caveat to that is we use furfural for the purpose, or we use furfural, we use Sanso Coopers strictly for the purpose of Chardonnay making. I've never measured for any of these or measured Sanso barrels in red wines. And so I think that it may be partially that Sanso produces a lot of this, but I think it may be partially that it just never integrates, because normally we'd see those aldehydes integrate into red wines. And when we get to Cabernet, I think it's going to make a little more sense. But in terms of any barrel we've ever measured, Sanso by far has the highest levels of this caramel note. So let's go ahead and get to smoky. Then again, not something you're looking for in tremendous amounts in Chardonnay. But there's none in the neutral, and there's not a whole lot. It's still a very small amount. And these are a medium toast. It's a pretty low number. I wouldn't expect a whole lot to be there. So there's a touch, but you might pick it up, might not. But nonetheless, there it is. Maybe you can smell that in there. And then moving on to lactone. And one of the things we find about lactone is lactone tends to dissipate a little less quickly than other things. And I think partially because lactone can be released through sulfur dioxide gassing in barrels. And since we so diligently gas, I tend to think that we're getting a little bit of lactone released consistently year in, year out. So there's enough of that above the odor effective value in both the neutral barrel and the new barrel. So there should be that nice little coconut whiskey flavor that comes from the newer barrel. And then let's move on to Eugenol and Isoeugenol. And these numbers are moderate at best, but there is a little bit of clove and spice in the Allier new one. So the neutral one probably not producing all that much. And then finally, let's get to vanillin and vanilla and vanillic aldehyde. And there's a whole lot more in the new barrel. And maybe you can smell that, maybe you can't. All right, I want to go back to this furfural and 5-methyl furfural slide again. You're like, why is this coming back again? What's going on? Where's Tim going? So what I want you to do is realize that these aldehydes are very reactive. And they're very reactive with anything that's in the reduced state. So aldehydes tend to be more towards that oxidative side. They're going to react with things that are reductive. So if you're smelling wine too going, I can't smell any of this stuff. I can't smell a dang thing because I'm sitting here smelling this wine that's a complete coffee roasted weird thing. Well, there's a formation of a compound called furfural thiol. It's a strong coffee aroma during aging and fermentation by furfural released from toasted stave. And so what happens is it's formed in wines during alcoholic fermentation when there is hydrogen sulfide around. And here we used a really high nutrient demand yeast, CY3079. And then what we did is went ahead and had a reduction issue, and we had plenty because we have these super high, furfural numbers, and we've given them the perfect conditions to create this roasted note. So pretty interesting. But what I want you to do now is I want you to go ahead and back up in a second. Let's go ahead and go to the next thing and talk about how we fix it. We'll back up and do this again in a second. So how do you fix it? So go to your third glass now. Go ahead and smell that glass and see if it's gone. So how do you fix it? And so we went ahead and fixed it. So when we were doing your blending trials, we decided we'd go after this and gave it a good shot. So how do you fix it if you have some sort of reduction issue? And this is a reduction issue as a whole. This isn't just confined to Chardonnay. This is how you use copper to bat your wine around. So your step one, if you ever need to do you think you've got a reduction issue, the first thing you do is do a copper trial. Go ahead and pop a wine with some copper and see if it goes away. Old school people throw a penny in it. I'd rather use some copper sulfate. Pop it in there and smell and see if it goes away. If copper sulfate does it, go ahead and move straight to step three. Go ahead and do a trial. But if it doesn't do anything, which it wouldn't do furfural thiol because we're in a very complex sulfide, what you want to do is go ahead and take and pull a bottle and add some ascorbic acid. And ascorbic acid works in a really interesting way, and it shatters these complex sulfides, and furfural thiol is a complex sulfide. This would also be the case if you had a wine that smelled like garlic and onions and vegetables and things like that. Go ahead and add some ascorbic acid, and that'll break those sulfides down into simple sulfides again, and copper trial again, and see if it smells better. In this particular case, I went ahead and whacked it with 1 milligram a liter, and boom, it blew it out. So I went ahead and trialed again at 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, and 0.5, and then used the lowest amount. And the reason you want to use the lowest amount in a copper trial is copper will almost always throw a haze. So you want to use just enough to bind up with that aroma and precipitate out. So we added just enough to precipitate that aroma, and that's it. And actually, I haven't even added the copper to the barrels yet. This is just the trial you're tasting now. And if you guys give me the thumbs up and say, hey, yeah, you fixed it, Chardonnay group, I hope you're listening. If you think we fixed it, I'm going to go ahead and make that add to the barrels because we have added the ascorbic as a whole to the barrels, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'll add the copper. So the thing is what we did is we added a little bit of ascorbic and waited about 2 weeks, not by choice, and then we added 0.4 milligrams a liter of copper sulfate to the trial wine. So we can go ahead and finish that up and fix it up. So now what I want you to do is go ahead and pause this presentation, go back to the beginning of the Chardonnay tasting, and now smell through and see if you can get those aromas that weren't there before. See if we've unmasked them by getting rid of that pretty pungent furfural thiol. I wish I could see your faces, but this will work for now. Now that you've gone back through and tasted everything again, just a quick review. There are just a few of the aromatics that barrels can contribute. There are probably thousands of them. These are 5 that we look at. But one of the things I recommend doing is barrels are a really big investment. They're really, 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 really expensive. I mean, you're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars that you're buying. I talked to Marcus at Lacole. They buy $1 million of barrels a year, and they're a small winery in the grand scheme of things, maybe medium-sized. And with these big wineries that buy millions and millions of dollars worth of barrels, if you're going to buy 1,000 barrels from a cooper, it's not a bad idea to do a little research to see who's delivering what to you. So running a couple of tests on some barrels to find out, are you getting your money's worth, isn't a bad idea. Roasted coffee notes might be nice in a Malbec. It was kind of popular for a while, getting that coffee aroma in wine. So maybe if you're looking for a little bit of reduction, you could get a wine, a barrel like a Sanso barrel, high in furfural, let it get a little reduced, get that roasted note in there, and then, you know, dial it back and go ahead and bring your nutrient back in so you don't get too much coffee, but you might get a little bit of that flavor in the background. Now you know how to get that smell. And now you're going to find it in wine and be like, oh my gosh, I know what that is. It's pretty interesting. Finally, oak is a powerful tool to add to your winemaking toolkit. You can bring so many things in and out of wine with oak, and also, you know, realize chips, powder, staves, everything else works just like a barrel does. We're just talking about barrels because they're cool and pretty and it's neat, but you can do a lot of things. As a matter of fact, I have kits at school that are just these compounds basically that they've extracted, and you can just shoot them straight into the wine, which is pretty interesting. So if you want to just buy some vanillin from oak, boom, shoot it in there. A little vanilla flavor right there, perfect for you. You want a little caramel, buy the caramel, shoot it in there. The thing is it doesn't ever integrate quite as well as a barrel does, but interesting nonetheless. All right, moving on to Cabernet.